Mesa Boogie rectifier amps. Some of the most popular and easily recognized amps in the world. These amps have been on countless records, and even though they're kind of known as a metal amplifier, they are known for being capable of much more, and they have been used for much more than that. But there is something that I have noticed about this line of amplifiers that frankly kept me from loving them for a really long time, and honestly still kind of irritates me to this day. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you'll probably know what that is already, but I just happen to have two Mesa Boogie dual rectifier Tremoverb models in my possession at the moment, but I sold one and I gotta ship it out later today. And usually when I do that, when I have doubles of amplifiers, I kind of play them back to back in order to see, you know, which one at the moment is just kind of hitting my ear a little bit better. And that same old problem with Mesa Boogie dual rectifiers reared its ugly head, I guess. So we're gonna talk about it. And by the way, if you're new here, my name is Kyle. I am an internet amp nerd. I can barely play guitar, but I just love to nerd out about high gain guitar gear. So if that's something that you're into, hit that like button, subscribe, stick around for a while. Thanks! Alright guys, so what is this issue that I am babbling on about? The issue that kept me from liking rectifiers for such a long time, frankly, pretty much my entire guitar playing career. It's not a career. Journey, I guess, would be a much better word, dating all the way back to 2015 when I got my first Mesa Boogie rectifier. Well, it is exactly this. The Mesa Boogie rectifier is wildly inconsistent in my experience. I talk to people about this all the time when they are asking me about, hey, which rectifier should I buy? Should I get a 3-channel? Should I get a multi-watt? Should I get a Tremoverb? Should I get a Rev G, which I just realized I didn't even put in this stack. And now I don't even know where it is, actually. Do I need to search for one of the holy grail Rev F models? Or should I just save my money and get the absolute cheapest one I can find? And I always tell them the same thing. If you can go and try it out, absolutely do that. And the reason is because even if you're comparing like for like, if you're comparing two multi-watt dual rectifiers, if you're comparing two 3-channel rectifiers, and especially if you're comparing, you know, the older 90s model rectifiers, they can be quite inconsistent. Now, part of that is due to age and how they've been cared for over the life of the amplifier, but especially in the 90s, it is due to the parts tolerances on these amplifiers. Now, when I was comparing these two Tremoverbs back to back, like we will do shortly in this video, I noticed some pretty massive differences between the two. And it's kind of crazy because they both have the exact same tubes in them. This one is in the mid 5,000 serial numbers. It is firmly in the Rev G camp, so it is not an early revision. And this one is somewhere in the 11,000 serial range. So they're somewhat far apart, but still they're the same circuit. They should be pretty much exactly the same. But I was discussing with Fluff after I played through these things yesterday how it's still, every time I come across it, it still blows me away how it's so crazy how different that two of the exact same model rectifiers can sound. He actually agreed with me, and he has a really good relationship with Mesa Boogie. He talks to a lot of the people over there, and he told me that apparently back in the 90s, they had a 5% parts tolerance on the components that go into the rectifier amps. So if you think about it, these are, you know, somewhat complex amplifiers, especially if you're comparing it to something like a JCM 800, 2203, 2204, 1959 Super Lead. Those are pretty simple circuits as far as amplifiers go. These, even for their time, had a good amount of technology packed into them. There's a decent amount of parts and components that go into making this circuit. So the more parts that you have in an amp, that 5% tolerance adds up, because 5% on a whole bunch of different parts can add up to wildly different amounts in the end. Now, I didn't know that back when I first got into amps and when I first got into rectifiers, and the first couple that I got just sounded terrible. Like, I didn't like anything about them. They were saggy, they were fizzy, they were somehow dark at the same time. Like, I couldn't really get them to cut and mix the way that I liked. There was just nothing that I really found redeeming about them, and I really found it like kind of puzzling why they were such a popular and such a highly touted amp, especially in the type of music that I play, which is, you know, hardcore and metal. And it took me years of going through these amplifiers, buying them, hating them, reselling them, just trying to figure out what was so special about these things before I finally got one that kind of connected with me even just a little bit. And that was a 2-channel triple rectifier I had that amp for quite a while. I really liked it, but in 2020, around the time that the whole pandemic kicked off, I kind of was like just not really in love with playing guitar, not really in love with gear collecting. I sold off a large portion of my gear collection at the time, and that Rev G triple rectifier was one of the amps that got sold. Now, of course, like an idiot, a few months later, I kicked myself because I got back into gear and I was like, man, that was the one rectifier that I liked. Why did I let that thing go? And naturally, as a gear hoarder, I had to go back and find another rectifier that kind of hit me the same way that that triple rectifier Rev G did. And again, I cycled through a bunch of them before I finally landed on this one, which is a 2015 dual rectifier multi-watt. The multi-watt really kind of made me change my opinions on the rectifiers. It was tighter, it was more aggressive, it just was more present in the frequencies that I liked. It wasn't nearly as flubby, it was easier to get it to tighten up, and overall just kind of like really made me appreciate the rectifier circuit for the first time truly, because even though I liked that triple rectifier, it still wasn't my favorite, but this multi-watt rectifier, I really fell in love with this thing, and it really just kind of changed my whole perspective on the line of amplifiers. And if you've been hanging around the channel for a while, you know that these are now some of my favorite amps for pretty much all, heavy music genres that I play. You can really manipulate these things to cover whatever you want by really shaping the tone going into the front end, by sticking them with different speaker cabinets and different speakers, by putting EQs in the loop. And you can say that for most amps for sure, but some amps are a little bit more malleable than others. And I've found that the rectifier, man, you can get it to do anything that you want with the right combination of guitar, pickups, pedals, and speakers and cabinet. But even so, like I kind of just rediscovered recently, yesterday, some of them will hit your ear really well, and some of them will just not sound so good. They won't feel so good. They'll feel saggier under your right hand. If you're looking for a tight response, it can be hard to find one that gives that. But of the rectifiers in my current collection that I have here now, including my Rev G, which is missing, I've kind of cultivated a stack of amplifiers here that sounds really good to me. So just to kind of show you guys what it is that I'm talking about, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna hook these two amplifiers up to the same cab. We're gonna mic them up through the same exact microphones, and I'm just gonna go back and forth between the amps on the vintage and the modern channels and just show you how big the variance is between the two, and I think that you're probably gonna be pretty surprised at how noticeable it is. So let's do it! All right guys, so we are all set up here. We've got both Tremoverbs hooked up to my KHE amp switcher. That way we can switch in real time between the two cabs and there's no lag, so we can compare them back to back so you guys can actually hear the differences. And both of the amps are going into my Angle 412 XXL cab with vintage 30s. We've got it mic'd up with an SM57 and a Voodoo VR1 ribbon microphone. So we'll check it out both boosted and unboosted, and I've got a Seymour Duncan distortion in the bridge of this LTD Phoenix. I currently have both amps set up like for like across both channels. Both amps have the same exact settings on the vintage channel, the same exact settings on the modern channel. Neither of them are set to channel cloning or channel switching on the back, so they are in their natural channel states. Both amps are set to bold and silicone diode rectifier settings, and both amps have Ruby 6L6s in the power section. The first three spots of the preamp section have the original Mesa 12AX7 Russian tubes, and then the following positions have JJs. They are literally exactly the same because I wanted to compare them directly before I sold one of them to see which one I liked better. So, without giving away my personal bias, amp number 1 is on top, amp number 2 is on the bottom. Top is newer, bottom is older. guys, so between the two, I hear some pretty noticeable differences. The first one just seems to have a little bit more gain overall. It's kind of like hollower in the mids. Like the mids are just not quite as present, especially in the upper mids. There's not as much of that upper mid cut that I like from the older rectifiers. I will say that it does have a bigger, punchier low end though. And one thing that I didn't touch on in my initial overview of, you know, this video and the reasons behind this video and everything, while I know that these are both stock, I don't know these amplifiers' full history. I don't know what they went through. I don't know if any parts were repaired. I know that they're not modded, but I don't know if anything has really ever been changed out on these. These amps were also like very, very well known for having issues with the relays that were inside of them going bad. So I don't know if those have even been replaced on either of these amplifiers. So keep that in mind, but that kind of all just kind of ties in with the parts tolerance differences. Because not only will the tolerances be different, but some of the parts will age differently too. Now, luckily for us, they're only a couple years apart in age. That was just something that I forgot to mention in the original overview, so keep that in mind. But yeah, that was unboosted. Let's see how much of a difference we notice with the boost on. Kicking in my Lick Larum Audio King in Yellow overdrive, and we are starting with number 1 again. All right, so even the way that they're taking an overdrive in front seems to be different. This one seems to be compressing a lot more. It's really odd, actually. It seems to be compressing quite a bit more. It seems to be squashing the low end quite a bit more, but it's also getting a lot more gain. Like this one definitely sounds more saturated with the gain at the same settings with the boost in front, whereas this one kind of was not changing a crazy amount. It was definitely tightening up. It was definitely getting more saturated and a little bit more present. But I feel like this one really kind of morphed between the drive being on and off. Real quick, I will turn the drive off and on each amp as I'm playing. That way you guys can kind of really hear the differences. We're gonna start with it off. So that was the top amp. Here's the bottom amp. All right, so honestly, man, like the main difference is this amp just overall seems a little bit more present in the mids, and the low end, while it seems maybe slightly tubbier, it's also not as big. This one has a bigger low end. It's just a little bit tighter, but again, not as present in the mids, and it's getting way more saturated with the boost in front. Really, really weird, man. Really weird. They're quite different from each other. So let's go ahead and switch between the two. And this is something, again, guys, that you will probably have a hard time picking out unless you're able to compare things directly. I usually know that I like a rectifier right off the bat based on how the low end reacts. So I at least kind of have that part down without having to compare it directly. But honestly, I thought both of these seemed tight on their own. They both sounded really good to me before comparing directly. Now that I've compared directly, this one is just tighter and punchier, but I don't like the mid as much. Whereas this one is a little bit looser, but I like the mid profile a little better. So I don't know. But all that just lines up with exactly what I said in the first part of the video. It's just that they can vary so much. It's so crazy how different they can be from amp to amp. So let's go over to the modern channel. Amp number 1, we are going to start with no overdrive. All right, guys, so pretty noticeable differences between these two on the modern channel as well. But one big thing, and you'll be able to see this hopefully on the camera, is that on this amp, the gain is dimed, and on this amp, it is not. I have it up around 1 o'clock, and yeah, it is definitely saturated, more saturated at 1 o'clock than it is dimed on this amp. I know it's not the tubes because I actually switched the tubes in these two amps back and forth once already. It's something within the circuit where this one is just not nearly as gainy, which the red channel on the Tremverbs, typically not as gainy as you would think until you really get it cranked. So that's why this one seems odd to me, because it's very saturated and a little bit tighter with the gain all the way up around 1 o'clock. Again, this one a little flubbier, a little scoopier, not as saturated. It's genuinely really odd. So let's hit them both with an overdrive now. We are still on the bottom one. Yeah, these differences are really crazy to me, like genuinely confused. I'm really confused as to why they sound so different. Let's throw an oddball into this though real quick. All right guys, so I have hooked up my stock Rev G dual rectifier. I have matched the settings on the modern channel as close as I possibly can. And yeah, here's what we got. There are differences between all three of them, but I will say these two are closer than this third one on the bottom. This third one on the bottom is a little bit of an outlier. It's a little tubbier, but the mids are forward in a way that I really like them. One more time, no boost. Starting again on the Rev G. All right guys, that's gonna do it for me today. As you can see, there are differences between all three of these amps in both channels. I would assume the orange channel on the Rev G because we didn't compare that. But anyways, I wanna hear what you guys heard on your end. I wanna hear your thoughts. Did you hear the differences that I'm talking about? Did you hear even more than I was talking about? Did you hear nothing at all? And most importantly, have you guys had a similar experience to me? Do you guys feel that like the rectifier amps just vary greatly from amp to amp like I do, or have you found them to be pretty consistent over the ones that you've tried? If so, let me know down below in the comments. I'm curious to see how many you've tried overall, if you're a psycho like me, or if you've only tried a couple, but you know, you've had a similar experience or you've had a differing experience. Whatever it's been, leave it down below in the comments. I really appreciated it. If you guys want to help the channel out, affiliate links down below in the description. If you want to get yourself a nice, crispy new rectifier, Sweetwater's the place to do it. So go ahead and grab it from my affiliate links down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Kyle here again. We'll see you next time.
You know what this wall is missing? Another amp. There we go.